Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast.
In the last few episodes, we discussed a couple topics that I'm hoping to bring to a head here. First, we talked about busyness, and next we talked about diversity. In this episode, I want to talk about the Sabbath, resting, which is sort of the counter to busyness, as well as community, which deals a lot with diversity, because when we're talking about communities, we need to know, what does a true community look like? So we're going to explore those two issues here today. Before we dig into either of those, I want to point out something. When you think of Jesus and you think about the life that he lived, I want to argue that I don't think Jesus did the greatest good. That wasn't his ethic. Now, of course, we could say, well, God is omniscient and he knows what would lead to the greatest good and all that sort of thing. And so ultimately the greatest good will come about. Apologists will say that God makes it so that the greatest number of people will be saved, or the least amount of pain will exist, whatever. They would say that the greatest good is ultimately brought about. But at least as far as we can tell, Jesus did not do the greatest good. I mean, he could have healed more people. Like, he could have healed the whole world if he wanted to. And if he couldn't have, then God could have, for sure, right? God the Father. He could have saved more people. Jesus appeared to Saul on the road to Damascus, and Saul was pretty convinced after that. He, at one point, was killing Christians, and then within moments, he was serving Jesus. Right? It's a blatant enemy turned into an ardent follower. Surely, if God would appear to more people like that, they would come to him. Jesus, God, the Father, could save more people, it seems. Like all the time in our culture, I see Christians who are justifying their actions based on doing what they claim is to be the greatest good. And of course, as humans, we can't know that. We can't know what compromises will lead to greater goods and whether those are worth it and all that kind of stuff. The only thing that we can do is really be faithful. But by the same metric which we justify our actions, or we condemn people for doing things like not voting, right? Because that can't possibly be the greatest good, because we need to get our guy in office. Right? You have to do something. You have to perform some action. You have to do something that's more tangible, that logically seems to be better than abstention, or than voting for somebody who's going to lose. Right? You have to do something that seems measurable. Yet when you look at Jesus' life, he almost certainly did not do what we would define as the greatest good. But he could have. So how does Jesus' metric work? I mean, he was faithful, but would it really have been unfaithful for him to heal more people? I don't think so. So why didn't he? And as I was thinking through that, of course, I can't know the mind of God, and I don't know all the parameters that were around Jesus. But it did strike me that as I was thinking of all of the miracles he did, other than the centurion's daughter that Jesus healed from a distance, I couldn't think of anybody else that Jesus healed from a distance, or any other miracle that he did from a distance. And even with the centurion's daughter, she actually had a representative come and stand before Jesus in his presence. So every healing that I can think of, every miracle that I can think of, Jesus did in the presence of the people receiving the miracle, or in the presence of a representative for the miracle to be done. I don't know if that was the parameter for who Jesus healed or what he did, whether representation was a part of that. But it really wouldn't surprise me if that was kind of a requisite, right? community is something that is central to Christianity. If you think about the central tenet for a lot of Christians, what they might say is one of the central tenets is that a Christian is supposed to follow the Great Commission. What is the Great Commission? Go out into all the world and make disciples of all nations. The Great Commission, a lot of times today, especially in conservative evangelicalism, is evangelism. Conversion is to get people to make some intellectual decision, to intellectually assent to some logical propositions. But that's not at all what the Great Commission is supposed to be. The Great Commission is that we are to make disciples, to make people follow in a particular way of life, to form a community. Jesus' strategy, or maybe it was really just the exemplified ideal human life, was to gather a few close people to him and do life with them. The good, the hard, the ugly. But community requires our most precious resource, requires our time. Time is a hard thing for us to give up in our culture. Of course, money is hard to give up too, and maybe that's what most people would think is the hardest thing to give up. And that's probably because time is essentially money. Money is something that we are paid for our time. Therefore, to give away money is really to give away our time. Whatever the case, time is an extremely precious resource for us, and one we guard with great fervor. Well, sort of. I mean, the problem with time is that you can't really guard it, right? It's a perishable resource that is constantly decaying until you perish and do the same. So we can't really guard our time. It's constantly escaping from us. And what we tend to do is direct as much of it as we can. It reminds me of what the Netflix CEO or president or whoever he was said when he said that their biggest competition was sleep. Time was escaping from their customers when they couldn't guard it, as they slept. Now, I don't really know how people lived in the past, and I'm not one who strongly believes in notions that at some point in the past there was this golden age where everything was great. But when it comes to our use of time and the problem of modern busyness, I feel like things are significantly worse today. And a big part of that, I think, is the result of what Ellul, Polanyi, and many others would argue, that we are living in a technical society. A society in which efficiency, production, and processes are prioritized. Those things give us power in the world because they transform the most space, providing consumables to the most people in the least amount of time. Technique is focused largely on manipulating time, squeezing the most possible out of it. Of course, it does this at a cost. And that cost, or one of them at least, is community. Today, we don't know who made most of the products in our home. We don't know most of our neighbors. Not really. Maybe some of their names, but we spend most of our time at work, taking our kids to their various activities or doing other things that will make us money or give our kids the best chance to succeed financially in the world. Industrialization and technique have killed the tight-knit communities. And overall, we've done a really poor job of replicating them in cities or suburbia. Most communities we do have end up being relatively shallow or fleeting, because most have a very limited amount of time that they're willing to commit to those communities. And transience is so high as people move around the country and around the world for better opportunities. Opportunities for more money, not usually opportunities for a stronger community. We all feel like we have so little time for anyone or anything else if it doesn't serve us. Our technical society has taught us what to value. The realization of modern busyness has helped to illuminate one of the most important pieces of God's teaching that I have long dismissed as metaphoric or cultural, like I think a lot of other people have. And this is the teaching of the Sabbath rest. It was funny. I was just watching a video the other day. I think it was, I forget his name. I don't know how to pronounce it, like James Talrico or whatever. In Texas, he's I guess he's trying to be a state representative. And they were voting on the 10 Commandments to be put up in schools. And he had a great speech, talking about, why that and why not love your enemies and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of more anti-violence. Where he's just pointing out that there are kind of double standards on what they want up there. And the irony of it is that they were in session on a Sunday working, right? And he addressed the Sabbath, a Saturday, which they also were working on, and Sunday as the Sabbath, which they were working on. And he just kind of showed their inconsistency. And we've got something very similar in my denomination. If you're going to be an elder or something, you have to adhere to the Westminster Standards of Faith. And in the Westminster Confession, it talks about the Sabbath and the importance of the Sabbath and not doing work, and even some other things like basically not having fun. I don't know. There's like leisure stuff that they lumped in there too. And a lot of people in my denomination take exceptions to that. And so it's very fascinating that in our day and age, the vast majority of people see things like the Sabbath as antiquated and things that don't really matter. This idea that doesn't really matter anymore. And it seems kind of petty, right? It seems kind of silly. Now for me, the turning point came when we were swamped and we were just so busy. I mentioned the story at the beginning of the season, but when we were out at this small church in Idaho, and the pastor was preaching on Revelation, it was a point in my life where we were so busy. I had a full-time teaching job, both my wife and I. We had, I think, 2 really young kids at that time, 18 months apart. Like our oldest was 2. We had a newborn. I was on the church diaconate. My wife was on the missions committee. We were support raising, traveling across the country to try to go to Romania. I mean, our lives were just packed. And when we were out at this church in Iowa, the pastor preaching from Revelation came to this verse, and it said, in hell, they will have no rest, day or night. And I thought to myself, man, that's a description of my life. That's a description of a lot of people's lives who I talk to. You go to church. Hey man, how's it going? Passing in the hallway. Busy as usual, right? That Protestant work ethic, like we're doing God's holy work. We're in line with Him. It's like, no, you're not. You're in hell. Right? There is no rest, day or night. There is no Sabbath. We're busy, distracted, in a hurry, impatient. And that impatience, as Cyprian mentioned, was leading to violence in our culture, right? In impatience, we want things now. We will grasp power now, even if that means compromising our moral values and our faithfulness to Jesus and the ways that He prescribed for us. We were impatient. We were busy for God. We were trying to be efficient, trying to squeeze the most that we could out of our world. But this Sabbath teaching really is the antithesis of all of that, of impatience, of technique. Technique tells us that we must control each and every moment and prioritize efficiency. Whereas the Sabbath teaches us that we can lay down control we don't really have anyway. We fool ourselves in thinking we have. But we can lay that down, and we can put it into the hands of a good God who created us and our universe with provisions. The technological society teaches us that production is one of the highest values, and doing is at the core of who we are as humans. Whereas the Sabbath teaches us that it is being which is at our core, and giving or spending our time with others that fulfills us. It's community that fulfills us. Being discipled and making disciples. Technique elevates exertion, whereas the Sabbath allows and provides for rest. This concept of the Sabbath is really the core antithesis of so much that we've talked about throughout all of our seasons. Why do fights and wars spring up? Because people have and want, so they seek to steal and protect what they have at the expense of others. Wars are the result of those who don't believe that the world will produce a sufficient amount to meet their needs. Wars spring up because accomplishments, doing, conquering, accumulating, are more important than being oneself without pretense, and being with other beings in community. Why are people consequentialists? Why do so many people believe that the ends justify the means? If not in thought, then certainly in action. Because technique teaches that efficiency is the core moral value. Seeking power, enacting violence, and elevating effectiveness over faithfulness stem from an embrace of technique. Whereas the Sabbath is God's teaching that humbling oneself in loving service and faithfulness is truly human, technique facilitates hurry, frustration, anxiety, wealth disparity, exploitation, power-mongering, and a host of other evils. The Sabbath produces loving communities of mutual service, whereas technique produces monocultures, assembly lines, exploited labor, clear-cut forests, and strip-mined lands of exploitation. Interestingly, this loss of community and Sabbath rest hasn't been an altogether unforeseen consequence of our worldview. In fact, for some of the culture shapers of our present-day reality, it was desired and intended. I don't think there's a better summation of this desired end than in the words of William Levitt, creator of modern-day suburbia. Just for a little bit of context, William Levitt was the guy who popularized suburbia, essentially. After World War II, you had a lot of GIs coming back, white GIs coming back, who were getting a ton of money to be able to spend on education, housing, other sorts of things. And so you've got this guy Levitt who starts to create these Levitt towns, right? These suburban areas where you've got these cookie cutter homes and everything. And now people are able to start buying their own homes. And the way that Levitt is able to kind of get subsidized or loans or get this foothold to make his his product advertised and popular and all that, he has to pitch this to the government. So here's one of the things that he says to advocate for his housing communities. He says, quote, "No man who owns his own house and lot can be a communist. He has too much to do." End quote. And right there, busyness is baked into the American system. Whatever the story and intentions behind our cultural shift after World War II, we can now see some of the larger ramifications of valuing technique, efficiency, production, and hyper-individualism. We have produced a society of busyness, hurry, anxiety, angst, feelings of low self-worth, consumerism, isolation. It's no wonder feelings of despair are so prevalent today. The reality we have created is a fictitious one, a counterfeit, artificial reality attempting to function in a good world that God created to work rightly. And this world doesn't work rightly without Sabbath, without rest, without allowing the land to go fallow every now and then, without us halting our attempt to play God and grasp at control for at least one day out of the week. Recenter ourselves. We are all striving for divinity. We are all atlases bearing the weight of the world on our shoulders, a weight we were never meant to carry. But rather than hand over to the Creator in recognition of our creatureliness, we continue to try to bear the weight ourselves. In the rest of this episode, I want to unpack some ideas around this simplistic gift given to us by God, this gift of the Sabbath. It's not a command or a concept given by a tyrannical deity who seeks to control every aspect of our lives, as someone like Richard Dawkins might try to claim. But the Sabbath is a gift given by a loving Father who knows what is best for his children. The Sabbath was made for humanity, not humanity to fulfill the Sabbath, some arbitrary law. To provide you with just a bit to chew on, I'm going to use Abraham Heschel's famous work on the Sabbath and pull some insights from that work, which I think will be particularly beneficial. Because I'm still struggling with the Sabbath, and Heschel is just the way that he writes is so insightful and so beautiful, and hopefully these snippets will give you way more wisdom than I can give you, and also whet your palate to go and check out his full work. Hopefully, after you hear about simplicity and complexity that we've been talking about for a number of months now, this gift of the Sabbath will make a lot more sense to you as a remedy, or at least as a mitigator of so many of the psychoses and illnesses that we as a culture have today. So with this foundation in place, the way that I'm going to continue is to essentially read a quote from the book, and then maybe provide just a brief commentary or scaffold on that for you to chew on. But I want to let Heschel's words kind of resonate with you for the most part, and hopefully our context so far will allow you to chew on it with an understanding of how that fits into simplicity and the conversation that we've had so far. So here's the first quote. Quote, "Most of us seem to labor for the sake of things of space. As a result, we suffer from a deeply rooted dread of time and stand aghast when compelled to look into its face. Technical civilization is man's conquest of space. It is a triumph frequently achieved by sacrificing an essential ingredient of existence, namely, time. In technical civilization, we expend time to gain space. To enhance our power in the world of space is our main objective. Yet to have more does not mean to be more. The power we attain in the world of space terminates abruptly at the borderline of time. But time is the heart of existence." End quote. Heschel identifies that we are trading time for space. That's what life essentially is for most people at most points in time. It's trading time for space. At least in our industrial world, that's a lot of how we spend our time. Heschel goes on to talk a little bit more about this in his next quote. He says, quote, "It is impossible for man to shirk the problem of time. The more we think, the more we realize. We cannot conquer time through space. We can only master time in time. The higher goal of spiritual living is not to amass a wealth of information, but to face sacred moments. In a religious experience, for example, it is not a thing that imposes itself on man, but a spiritual presence. What is retained in the soul is the moment of insight rather than the place where the act time came to pass. A moment of insight is a fortune, transporting us beyond the confines of measured time. Spiritual life begins to decay when we fail to sense the grandeur of what is eternal in time." End quote. So I really like this by Heschel because he recognizes that time is a problem for us. Right? Our time, like the Netflix CEO recognized, our time is escaping from us. We're a balloon filled with air at the beginning of our lives, and that air is always going out. We don't know exactly when we're going to be all out of air, but we eventually will be. We're all running up against time. And then constantly trading in that time that we have to conquer space. But because our time will end, right? That's a very just kind of limited existence that we have there. And so what Heschel says is we've got this problem of time, and essentially one of the ways that we can choose to handle it is to try to conform space to that time. But the other thing that we can do is we can conquer time in time, right? And so one of the ways that you do that is you soak up that time. Rather than trade in your time, you enjoy time. So, for example, right, if you think of the spiritual, which he shows, or you think of community, when you are spending time with others, when you are enjoying the moment, when you're being present in the moment, you are conquering time in time. And so if I go and I eat a meal by myself, I can taste really good food, right? That space, that stuff that takes up space, that matter. I can enjoy that food, but that's a really fleeting experience. I enjoy it for that moment, that fleeting moment. If I go and do any number of things, if I go and buy a car, that car eventually rusts out. Anything in space is fleeting. But time, if you conquer time in time, if I share that meal, that really good meal, with people, that moment of my taste buds being just being throttled by the fantastic taste that's on my mouth, right? Rather than that fleeting, I have a memory, a moment that will stay with me for the rest of my existence. So community, sharing time with people, being present, resting, drawing back from trying to conquer space, and conquering time in time by being present in time, actually ends up being what is truly meaningful. It gives meaning to our lives. That fleeting matter, the fleeting taste, the fleeting pleasures, that goes away very quickly. But the moments, the community, the presence, that stays with us. Because those things, those memories, those experiences, those relationships, those are immaterial. They can't be taken away. And after this, Heschel goes on to describe just the beautiful distinction of Yahweh, God, in the way that he presents himself to his people. So listen to what Heschel says. Quote, "While the deities of other peoples were associated with places or things, the God of Israel was the God of events, the Redeemer from slavery, the revealer of the Torah, manifesting himself in events of history rather than in things or places." End quote. One of the things that Heschel just constantly points out in his work is that the way that God and the Hebrews, the ancient Hebrews, viewed time was extremely unique, right? The way that God reveals himself, not in objects of wood or stone, but in narratives of events of people. And yeah, I understand, think Greek gods. Yes, there are stories about the Greek gods and things, but just the way that Heschel unpacks it is you recognize that there's a very big distinction between the way that God views time and space and relationships and presents himself to his people, and the way that a lot of other traditions tried to present their deities. So I want to continue on with two other quotes from Heschel that are actually, I think they're separated in the book, but I'm going to kind of string them together here to make a point. Heschel says, quote, "It is indeed a unique occasion at which the distinguished word gadash is used for the first time. In the book of Genesis, at the end of the story of creation. How extremely significant is the fact that it is applied to time. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. There is no reference in the record of creation to any object in space that would be endowed with the quality of holiness. This is a radical departure from the accustomed religious thinking. The mythical mind would expect that, after heaven and earth had been established, God would create a holy place, a holy mountain or a holy spring, whereupon a sanctuary is to be established. Yet it seems as if the Bible, it is holiness and time, the Sabbath, which comes first. When history began, there was only one holiness in the world, holiness in time. When at Sinai the word of God was about to be voiced, a call for holiness in man was proclaimed. Thou shalt be unto me a holy people. It was only after the people had succumbed to the temptation of worshipping a thing, a golden calf, that the erection of a tabernacle of holiness in space was commanded. The sanctity of time comes first, the sanctity of man came second, and the sanctity of space last. End quote. His second quote, quote, What is so luminous about a day? What is so precious to captivate the hearts? It is because the seventh day is a mine where spirit's precious metals can be found with which to construct the palace in time, a dimension in which the human is at home with the divine, a dimension in which man aspires to approach the likeness of the divine. For where shall the likeness of God be found? There is no quality that space has in common with the essence of God. There's not enough freedom on the top of the mountain. There's not enough glory in the silence of the sea. Yet the likeness of God can be found in time, which is eternity in disguise. End quote. And that second quote is just one of the most beautiful quotes I've read from pretty much anybody. I think that takes the cake. So go back and listen to that again. Find the text and read it. It's just absolutely beautiful. But Heschel is just pointing out that the Bible has treated time very uniquely. Like it's not something that we would have expected. It just doesn't fit with what you see in the ancient Near East, or what we just think of, right? We would think of objects historically as being that which the gods would call holy, but here it's about time and relationships and all of that. This uniqueness of time is something that I think it would be easy to look back at the ancients and say, yeah, of course, most of them got it wrong or weird. But today we get it. We get that moments are really important. Maybe, but I think our idolatry just looks a little bit different. And I think Heschel's next quote is going to unpack that a little bit. So let me read his quote and then discuss it. Quote, According to the Stagirite, we need relaxation because we cannot work continuously. Relaxation, then, is not an end. It is for the sake of activity, for the sake of gaining strength for new efforts. To the biblical mind, however, labor is the means towards an end, and the Sabbath as a day of rest, as a day of abstaining from toil, is not for the purpose of recovering one's lost strength and becoming fit for the forthcoming labor. The Sabbath is a day for the sake of life. Man is not a beast of burden, and the Sabbath is not for the purpose of enhancing the efficiency of his work. Last in creation, first in intention. The Sabbath is the end of the creation of heaven and earth. The Sabbath is not for the sake of weekdays. The weekdays are for the sake of Sabbath. It is not an interlude, but the climax of living. End quote. This right here cuts at the heart of our present-day idolatry. It cuts at the heart of a technical society whose end is the labor, right? Or material possessions or the space. And Heschel says, no, the Sabbath isn't so we can rest, so we can work more, because that would make work the end, right? That would make work the purpose. Work isn't the purpose. It's not a bad thing, but work isn't the purpose. It's the means to the end. And what is the end? What is the last day of creation? Or as Heschel says it, last in creation, first in intention. Right? The culmination, the climax, what everything leads up to is not the 6 days of labor. It's the 1 day of Sabbath rest. That is the crown jewel of creation. That is the end. We don't rest so we can work harder. We rest because that is the fruition of our work. To enjoy time in community and to be present. But a lot of times that's not really what people use the Sabbath for. They don't use it for community building or to do something meaningful or to be present. They use it to fit in as much as they can for their kids' travel ball so that their kids maybe can get college scholarships. I mean, that's basically a second job right there, right? They don't use it to be present with other people. They use it to get wasted. Whatever it is, you might say, well, yeah, but those things are fun or whatever you want to say. But there's a difference between having fun and being present and building community and resting and not striving for more and more and more. All right, I've got one more quote from Heschel that I'm going to leave you with, and I'll put these all in the show notes, as well as a couple that I ended up not reading, but one which is really amazing that I'm not going to get to that I'd recommend you checking out in the show notes. Here's the last quote from Heschel. Quote, "There's no moment which I possess exclusively. The very moment belongs to all living men as it belongs to me. We share time. We own space. Through my ownership of space, I am a rival of all other beings. Through my living in time, I am a contemporary of all other beings. We pass through time. We occupy space." End quote. I love that. We share time. We own space. Through my ownership of space, I'm a rival of all other beings. But through my living in time, I am a contemporary of all beings. It brings us all together, just like we were talking about diversity in the last couple episodes, right? We could focus on our distinctions, but we have this commonality, right? We humans we share a number of things in common, but the fact that we are contemporaries in time, right? We share time. It's a beautiful thing to think about relationships that we share with other temporal beings in time. And this is a part of the way that God made us to have rest, to not be busy, to be in communities where we can have accountability, where we can get an opportunity to see ourselves in the mirror, to have mirrors placed up for us, and for us to place up mirrors for other people to stop and reflect, to pause, to be present, to enjoy life, to enjoy moments, to create memories and intangible, immaterial things that we will carry with us for the rest of our lives, rather than fleeting moments of pleasure, of tastes, of feelings, all of that. Our culture is filled with a lot of anxiety, a lot of loneliness. It's something where we are surrounded by people. And when we get home, we're surrounded by people on our social media feeds. Social media, right? Social. But we're lonely. We're anxious. We're despairing. There's so much of that. And I think a huge part of the answer to that, yes, simplicity overall. But what does that simplicity look like? It looks like, I think, Sabbath rest and community. And those two things go together, because it's not just about sleeping in and resting so that you can be more equipped to work harder next week. It's about being still, but being with others. It's about being, right? Hopefully, you are able to give the Sabbath a second thought. Hopefully you can pick up the book on the Sabbath. And it's something worth thinking about, and something that I think will do you and your family and your immediate community very well if you took more seriously.
That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.